So when we think about our students, and I want you to think for a moment about the following four items. If you can go to that next slide. Both the student actions and behaviors that are tied to these. So first off, looking at resilience and perseverance, but also critical thinking, confidence, and independence, and a deep understanding of retention. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds just to scan through those, but we're going to look at what those look like in the elementary and middle and high school world as well. Always give proper wait time. We can go ahead and go on to that next one. Thank you. So one of the things that I want to highlight is struggling with productive struggle and what that looks like. With this job that I've had, I've been lucky enough to be in classrooms over hundreds over the past 3 years. And these five components stand out as kind of within classrooms and within students, those that are struggling to productive struggle. So when you think about a desire for immediate answers, the proverbial, hey, is this right? As soon as students finish, the low frustration tolerance, fear of making mistakes, and we see that in the students' faces as they start to try and answer. It's also the lack of persistence and that over reliance on help. I want you to look through those five and in the chat, write down which one maybe is the most evident with the current students that you're teaching. And I'll give you a minute just to chat in the chat, just which one of those is highlighted the most. And absolutely, I see a lot of the common themes. And as you're typing those, I'm going to share the over-reliance on help. My first year of teaching, I logged maybe many miles a day in my classroom because I would be running around answering those quick questions. And I learned after looping with my students how that was not helpful to them. So it was kind of living in that productive struggle. We're to look at opportunities that students have that. I see a lot of fear of making mistakes as well. Thank you all. So going to the next section, I want to look at what does productive struggle look like in K through 5, so the elementary world. If you are in Chicago by me, K to 5 buildings don't really, it's K to 8, so definitely talk with that. But we're going to look at high school in a little bit. But with struggle by itself, like Amy mentioned, it's not necessarily beneficial. So we want to look at opportunities and space that we provide for productive struggle. And I want to look at two scenarios, one kinder and one in 5th grade. So if you think about kindergarten, if we have some teachers, please let us know, any kindergarten teachers out there. One of the activities I've seen throughout multiple kinder classes is where students are asked to count quantities. And when you think about students initially counting quantities, I've seen students have counters on their table and they count them one at a time. And if you've seen kinder counting, you notice that they count the same items. And there's that mistake of, oh, you counted that item twice or 3 times. And we're going to talk about our resource with Amy a little bit later, but letting students do that, and that's okay. And you get to see them figure out better strategies. And when you think about students counting, absolutely, that cardinality, they start to come up with better strategies. And you've seen they'll group in 10s or groups in 5s on their own, or they'll take those counters and put them in a cup so they're not repeating that counting. And it's great to see, but it really relies on the teacher to step back to see those. Another, at the other tail end of elementary that we see is within geometry. One of my favorite activities is looking at rectangular prisms and volume. And a lot of the want is to jump to those formulas early on. And when we think about those formulas early on of length times width times height, we want to give students that opportunity to try to build those early on, to see what those actually mean. And one of the activities within our resource, and I know we have a couple people in the chat that use our resource for elementary is the building of rectangular prisms and letting students struggle with that. So one of my favorite activities that I've seen students do is if you look at the two rectangular prisms in that image, you can probably picture which one students can build really easily. And you can probably see which one, when they try to build, will fall apart multiple times. And it is great to see them fall apart and rebuild those items. And allowing space for that so they can make those connections is key. When we look past this a little bit, and again, there's opportunities for those across all grade levels. If we jump to the next section, this I had a really long conversation with Charisse, who's going to be talking later on today. But when we think about productive struggle and identifying where those can be in activities and games and how that can encourage it, and I want you to think a little bit about either your students that you have or kids you might have that play video games and how much they ask you for help. I'll let you think about that for a second because I have never, if or rarely, I should say, seen a child ask an adult for help with video games. They figure those out. They productively struggle consistently through those. So as you're thinking about that, the activities that students use and the manipulatives they're using are so vital in allowing them to productively struggle. One of the things that we really want to look at is, are we allowing for opportunities for them to see different representations so they have different ways to show that math? One of my favorite ones being in a classroom I was in Springfield, Illinois. If you see one of the activities that shows modeling fractions, I watched a class, and as they were modeling fractions, I saw a couple things happen. Students were able to get they had a little toolbox of their own, and they were able to look through it and see which tools they wanted to use. And others were looking around the room for resources they know they had used with their teacher. So really thinking about, do we allow students opportunities to do math in different ways so they have ways to productively struggle and identify those? I want you to think for a second, as you're thinking about your class, again, K to 12, what different strategies in the math topic you might be teaching now might lend itself to different strategies for them to solve. So just in the chat, share some of those. What are some of the current math topics you're on? And as you type those in the chat, just think to yourself, are students able to model this in different ways? Give you a minute just to type in the chat. And that lets us know what grade level we might be teaching too, gives us a hint into that. And I see Shauna has division. Division is a huge one. I just think back to the punishment I had with the standard algorithm and only the standard algorithm. Excellent. Got trigonometry and algebraic expressions. Perfect. That leads us in well to our next portion. Thank you all for sharing and continue to do so. This leads into as we look to 6 through 12. So as we look to 6 through 12, and as students get to middle and high school, we want to look for identifying space for productive struggle and knowing that we may have students that have experienced this coming to us, or that this might be the first time they've had the opportunity to productive struggle. And the reason you'll notice where it says the quickest path is not always the best path in bold is because shortcuts can sometimes limit that productive struggle when we present those first. So thinking back to that resilience and perseverance, the critical thinking, and instilling confidence in students, really thinking about the opportunities you give them. And Glennon, you said it perfectly. Fast math is not better math. And I love that. And I hope that sticks with you because when you think about the opportunities we give to students, One of the big things is analyzing correct and incorrect examples so they can really critically think about the process and not just the answer. And other opportunities such as sorting, comparing, and reasoning. But lastly, the collaborative portion with peers. When we think about building confidence within students, that's such an important strategy to help them build confidence because they can reason that with their peers as opposed to whole group a little bit earlier. And lastly, um, is embracing misconceptions and incorrect answers. Sometimes there's a want to shield some of those items, and shout out me. I'll take that, Glennon. But when we think about misconceptions, they're an opportunity to reflect on those. And a lot of the times when we see misconceptions, we want to, Amy said this in another meeting we had, we want to mow those out of the way, but that's not the case. Um, Misconceptions can be a driver of productive struggle, and highlighting these and learning from them is so important. And before I hand this off to Robert, I want you to just think about what is something you might be able to do to build your students' stamina when it comes to productive struggle? Because we know they're coming to us in various spots. So just think about that and